My house on Indian Run Road was built just before I was born in 1942. At that time, there were just two other houses on the road. One was my grandfather's house, which was built in 1924, and the other was the Haney Farm, which was barely in hollering distance, which dates to 1936. When I was born, the population of Flatwoods was well under 150. I just realized that I was the fourth generation of my family living there back then, at one time. By the way, this is most likely the first home movie ever produced in Flatwoods. My dad's holding the camera right before he left for the war in 1943. I lived in that house the first 18 years of my life. I was there when Indian Run Road got house numbers, and I watched when they paved the road that same summer. This was my home until I graduated from Russell High School in 1960. Flatwoods and Russell will always be a part of my DNA. I hope you enjoy the film.
Before 1750, the land was populated primarily by the Shawnee tribe of American Indians. They were mound builders, leaving lasting evidence of their presence. In 1767, Daniel Boone ventured into the region and hunted along the Big Sandy River. Boone also left evidence of his presence. He liked to carve the words, "D. Boone killed a bar," into trees to mark his hunting successes. During the Revolutionary War, General James Wilkinson became the third highest ranking officer in the U.S. Army, behind George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. In 1783, at the end of the war, General James Wilkinson was given a large land grant in Western Virginia. In the late 1790s, Wilkinson began to liquidate his land holdings. Robert Pogue Sr. purchased 5,000 acres from the Wilkinson tract. In 1800, Robert Pogue Sr. and his two sons, George and Robert Jr., acquired a 2,300-acre tract that adjoined the Wilkinson grant. The two tracts that Pogue acquired would become Pogue Settlement. The Pogues were not the only settlers to this 18th century Kentucky frontier. In 1798, before the Pogues moved to the area, Catlettsburg was founded at the junction of the Ohio and Big Sandy rivers and was soon on its way to becoming a thriving town. And a few miles down the Ohio River, in 1803, the town of Greenupsburg became the county seat of newly founded Greenup County, which included the Pogue settlement. In the early 1800s, farmers plowing the ground of eastern Kentucky found deposits of iron ore. Soon, the pig iron industry prospered, and furnaces with the name of Argolite, Belfont, and Amanda became milestones in the region's industrial development. Prior to this time, all iron articles and tools had to be carried over the mountains from forges in Maryland or Virginia, or floated down the Ohio River from factories in Pittsburgh, and their cost was prohibitive.
In 1826, Archibald Paul, and his partner George Pogue constructed an early iron furnace in the region. Bellefonte Furnace became very successful, and it was the leading producer in what became the Hanging Rock iron region. George Pogue's success enticed other members of the Pogue family to enter the iron business.
To the Pogue family. As you know, several members of the family hold title to thousands of acres of land grants in eastern Kentucky. For nearly 30 years, there has been little population growth or new industry here. I see a large opportunity for an iron furnace on the western edge of our property. I hope you will join with me in this venture. Robert Pogue, Sr. I am pleased to announce that the iron furnace that we have been working on for nearly a year has been opened. James E. McDowell and William Lindsay Pogue have also joined us in the venture. We have named the structure Amanda Furnace, after William's infant daughter, Robert Pogue, Sr.
Between 1820 and 1850, more than 65 charcoal furnaces would be built in the Hanging Rock iron region. In fact, this was the nation's largest source of iron before the Civil War.
I just learned that Amanda Furnace has ceased operations after nearly 25 years. Also, Pogue Settlement recently changed its name to Ashland, and our population is now nearly 1,000. There are lots of changes happening here. Robert Pogue, Sr.
Mother, my husband George and I have settled in an isolated place about 3 miles south of the Ohio River. The land is flat here, and it's good for corn farming. There are no more than 5 to 10 homes scattered here, and our spiritual needs are met by a circuit rider who comes on horseback every week from Greenupsburg. We meet for services in the parlor of the largest home, and it has a piano. Your loving daughter, Martha.
That small, isolated community area, now known as Flatwoods, was originally called Advance, named for the Advance Methodist Church, which formed the Sunday school group in 1860.
Dear Mother, my husband George and I made a trip to Ashland to buy seeds and other supplies. We will be planting corn in the next week or so and hope for a good crop. It was an all-day trip with a horse and wagon, and the roads are very bad. But tomorrow will be a better day. Your loving daughter, Martha. We don't get much news here, but somebody who just got off a riverboat was passing out these flyers. Have you heard anything about this? This is really scary. I mean, this could cause a war. Margaret Holt.
Yes, this was the beginning of a war, one unlike any other. It was state against state, brother against brother, and business as usual was not possible, even in a small corner of Kentucky.
This war between the states is now getting close to home. Just a few miles from Ironton, up the Ohio River in the town of Catlettsburg, Kentucky, 1,000 Confederate troops plundered the town. This is very close to home. I fear for the safety of our people. John Campbell, letter in the Ironton Register.
Even though the unpleasantness between the North and South continues, it's encouraging that the steamboat service from Cincinnati extends all the way upriver to Greenupsburg, Kentucky, and to Ironton, Ohio, as well as to both Amanda and Ashland, Kentucky, and then makes a turnaround at Catlettsburg. Many people, though, fear to travel on the river at all as rebel forces can shoot at the boats from the woods that are along the river. George Wolfe, editor, The Lawrence Register. Today, the western part of Virginia seceded from the state of Virginia. The new state is called West Virginia. But they are still fighting not far from us. At least we are no longer just a few miles from rebel territory. George Wolfe, editor, The Lawrence Register.
Everyone I know is talking about the horrible battle at Gettysburg last week. In 3 days, there were more than 50,000 casualties. This war has been going on for 2 years now, and it's tearing our country apart. I just don't know how this all is going to end. John Campbell, letter in the Ironton Register.
The war is over. Finally. More than 600,000 dead. 3 of them were my sons. God help us all. Jeremiah Landrum.
Anthony Wayne Carter bought a little steamboat named the Elwood that ran between Ironton and Greenup, Kentucky. At the same time, he bought 50 acres of land on the Kentucky side of the river, which has almost nobody living there. The nearest houses are a couple of miles away, up the river, in a little community that grew up around the now closed Amanda Iron Furnace. George Wolfe, editor, The Lawrence Register. The little Kentucky town across from Ironton is so small that it doesn't yet have a name, and it certainly doesn't have ferry service yet. The people who traveled on Captain Anthony Carner's ferry up and down the river from Ironton referred to it as Carnersville, in reference to the ferryboat captain who owned land there. George Wolfe, The Lawrence Register.
In the late 1860s, railroads were on their way to changing the way of life in America. Collis P. Huntington was one of 4 visionaries who sought to link the nation with train service. He had just bought the nearly bankrupt Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, and he then brought rail service from his base in Washington, D.C. westward through the West Virginia coal fields, transporting massive quantities of coal to the large industrial markets to the west. His railroad line terminated in the small West Virginia town of Guyandotte. The newly expanded city would soon be renamed Huntington in honor of Collis P. Huntington. John Russell was an Irish immigrant who had settled in Ashland, Kentucky. He was a partner in the Means and Russell Iron Company, and he felt certain that the Transcontinental Railroad was going to change the character of American business. He was particularly interested in the gap in the proposed Transcontinental Railway that was not yet filled. Quite simply, John Russell was certain that the most efficient railroad route from Huntington, West Virginia to the industrial city of Cincinnati was on the land directly along the Ohio River Valley.
John Russell and his Means and Russell Iron Company purchased the existing land that lay beside Amanda Hill from the Pogue brothers. Then to the west, they laid out lots and established the town of Riverview. They were now ready for an expected expansion of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad westward from Huntington, West Virginia to Cincinnati, Ohio. And they intended to sell the railroad right-of-way along the river to Mr. Collis P. Huntington himself. George Wolfe, The Lawrence Register.
I just read this in today's Ironton Register. Anthony Carner recently began ferry service from Ironton to Riverview. He bought more land and moved the ferry landing from the area called Needmore to what is now Ferry Street and made a picnic ground so that people in Ironton could come over on the ferry and enjoy their outing. A dance house was built in the grove and swings were hung on the limbs of some of the big trees. It became a lovely place for recreation. Very nice. This is even better than having a full-page advertisement in the Ironton Register. Anthony Carner.
There are only a handful of people with children living in the new community of Riverview, and the first school in the town is being taught by Captain Carner's daughter Alice, who was just 15 years old. She is very good with the children, and they are very attentive. Edith Yoke, Riverview School Board.
In 1873, the town's name was changed from Riverview to Russell in honor of John Russell, who had been responsible for turning the open land into a grid of lots for development. And in 1874, the town of Russell was incorporated. And the same year, the Russell Post Office was also established.
While the new town of Russell is starting to really grow, our little town of Advance out in the country has also grown enough that we have our own church house now. A small building of worship was built at what we call the end of the road, Hillary Finch.
Just 4 years after Captain Carner's daughter Alice was the first school teacher, we now have our very own schoolhouse, referred to as the Bellefonte School. We are so proud of our progress. Edith Yoke, Russell School Board.
In 1877, a series of nearly 24 maps was published, showing the entire length of the Ohio River Valley beginning in Pittsburgh. Here's the city of Ashland, and also Bellefonte Furnace, and the Means and Russell Iron Works. And up on the hill overlooking the Ohio River, here's the huge farm of John Kincaid. Speaking of him, the noted artist Eli L. Hayes did a rendering of the Kincaid farm, and it was produced and sold all over the region. And back to the map, you'll notice that about a mile or two south of the Ohio River, the map maker put in the words Flat Wood Precinct. It's almost prophetic that this land would one day evolve into the second largest town in northeastern Kentucky, named Flatwoods.
There's a lot of people working and laying railroad tracks in Russell and Chinville. And a lot of people are saying that this town's actually going to have a train station. Just imagine Russell being a stop on the Transcontinental Railroad. Wow! Jim Bob Dixon.
Today, I saw this ad in the New York Times and I showed it to my partner Hugh Means. He didn't say a word. He just had a big smile on his face. Make that a huge smile. John Russell.
In rapid succession, Russell had constructed a rail yard, roundhouse, and car shops, not to mention a passenger station and a freight station. The city was growing quickly. More and more people who lived there worked for the C&O. Russell was truly a railroad town and proud of it.
Advance got its own post office today. There was a big celebration as we finally have our own postal service. I mailed the first letter to my brother in Russell, Pleasant Craft, Postmaster, Advance, Kentucky. The railroad has brought so many good things to town. The new Russell YMCA is one of them. The trainmen who travel need a place to stay, and this is perfect. And the local people love their 24-hour restaurant, Benjamin Childers.
Dear Brother Bob, can you imagine this? The Russell Arnton Ferry is now on its very own postcard. Come visit us soon and we'll make the trip to Arnton. Your sister, Carla Sue.
This is what Russell looks like at the very beginning of the 20th century. Here is the Russell Hotel, right across from the train station, and you can see from all the activity that this is a very busy place. Clyde Henderson.
Brother Richard, we are a small but growing town and we don't have a doctor here full time. Fortunately, we do have a frequent visit from one or two medicine men who travel and sell tonics that are supposed to make people feel better. I bought you a couple of bottles. I hope you get to feeling better soon. Your brother, Henry.
The smallpox epidemic has hit Russell. Yellow flags were placed on gate posts to identify homes affected. During the epidemic, trains were not allowed to stop in Russell because it was feared some passenger might sneak off the train and contaminate himself and others as well. Jack Webster, Greenup County Health Officer.
Dr. O.P. Clark opened his medical office on Belfont Street in a little cottage. We no longer have to get the ferry to Ironton to see a doctor, and hopefully the medicine shows will now stop coming to town. Roscoe Clark. I'm so glad I work for the railroad. Every employee gets a certain number of free train passes each year, and my family has already been to Coney Island and Cincinnati once this year and will go again before school starts. Daryl Stevens.
This is the first issue of the new weekly newspaper, the Russell Times, and I'm excited about the future of this community. Robert Stroop, publisher.
We're fortunate to have an icebox to keep certain foods cold, and the Iceman now comes to Russell on a regular basis. This is just like living in the big city. Laura Ward.
The paving of Belfont Street, as well as Etna, Boyd, and Houston Streets, is all done. A crew came from Ironton and paved all 4 streets. We still have more horses and buggies than cars, but we are prepared for the future. Harold Runkle.
The Russell High School is now open and ready for our first classes. We have a full 4-year high school in downtown Russell, just like the bigger cities. This is a great day for our town and our young people. C.E. Blankenship, science teacher.
It's a sad day for the town of Advance. After having a post office here since 1892, they have discontinued our postal service and moved it to Russell. It's so hard to get to Russell from Flatwoods. Few people here have a car, and going by horse and wagon up and down Wheeler Hill is really scary, especially after a hard rain when the mud is unbearable.
Russell has its own movie house. The Mikado Theater has opened at Houston and Railroad Street with Mr. Henry Hunter as manager. The first film playing is Birth of a Nation. It's a silent film and runs about 3 hours. Everybody is talking about it. Eddie Burgess.
While Russell had paved streets, more than a few cars, and a brand new moving picture theater, Advance was still a community of just a handful of people. And for most, their transportation was a horse and buggy. It was a community where the mere presence of an automobile on the gravel roads would bring children to stare in amazement. And as likely as not, the children weren't in school. The first Advance school was a few years away. Just a little over 2 years after the Advance post office was closed, they reopened it. But the name Advance was not used. The new post office was named Cheap. Yes, Cheap. Most local people knew that it was named in honor of the Reverend Cheap, a blind minister who was once the beloved pastor at the Advance Church. But most outsiders simply made fun of the name. Cheap, Kentucky. Among the locals of what had been Advance, the name Cheap, Well, it never caught on.
Russell's fire department has bought its first motor-driven fire truck. It's a 1918 Ford, and we're now right up there with the big cities in firefighting. I guess we can retire the fire horses now.
Advance now has a car repair shop. Not full-time, of course, because there aren't enough cars here for that. But my blacksmith shop's taken on a nice sideline. I figure if I can take care of their horseshoes, I can certainly take care of the tires and the engines for their cars. Payne Reed, blacksmith and auto repairman.
In 1920, a group of real estate developers realized that the town of Russell simply doesn't have space for many more houses, so they're selling lots here in Advance. Sorry, I just can't call it cheap. The ads for the lots refer to the subdivision as Flatwoods. Now that's a good name. George Collins. On April 21st, 1922, the Ironton-Russell Bridge opened to traffic. The total cost was $700,000. The new bridge will mean a lot of growth for Russell. Why, this is the only bridge across the Ohio River between Gallipolis and Cincinnati. This was a big deal. The governors from Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia all attended. George Wolfe, The Lawrence Register.
In 1926, Blue Ribbon Bus Line started operation, and for the people of Russell and Flatwoods, the bus had very different meanings. The vast majority of people in Flatwoods did not have cars, and for them, it opened up a whole new world. The many attractions of Russell were now just a 5-cent bus ride away, and going to town to see a movie became a new experience for many Flatwoods people. And Flatwoods men without a car could take a job at C&O and always have a way to work. In 1927, there was an outstanding group of seniors at Russell High School, but one young woman stood out in particular. Numa Lee Fouts, shown in the front row, was to become the longtime librarian at Russell High School, impacting the lives of literally thousands of Russell students for many decades. In 1929, Earl D. Mittendorf became editor and publisher of the Russell Times. His writing was not only the voice of the community for the next 40 years, but the weekly paper's hometown journalism reflected the community's heart and soul.
In the spring of 1931, Numa Lee Fouts, a Russell girl who is a senior at the University of Kentucky, became the first Miss Kentucky, being named by Governor Flem Sampson to represent the state at the Shenandoah Apple Festival in Virginia. We are so proud of her. Sarah Hendricks.
The Depression took a severe toll on many banks around the country. But the two banks in Russell, the People's Bank and First National Bank, both survived and merged to become First and People's Bank.
When the train called the George Washington was inaugurated as C&O's top-notch passenger service from Cincinnati to Washington on April 30th, 1932, it was one of only two all-air-conditioned, long-distance trains operating in America. Every night, for decades, the people of Russell would hear the train whistle just before bedtime and say, "There goes the George." It's said that some local residents wouldn't put their children to bed until after the train had passed. Jack Leroy, writing for the Russell Times.
The new Advance School was built in Flatwoods, and it's by far the most modern schoolhouse in eastern Kentucky. And it's an easy walk for every school child in the community. Miss Bessie Howes, 6th grade teacher.
Russell now has both of the two major grocery chains here, Kroger and the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, which everyone calls the A&P. Downtown Russell is really full of shopping options for our residents. Earl D. Mittendorf, the Russell Times.
This is the first time that a Russell High School basketball team has gone to the state tournament. They won the regional tournament and will be playing at Alumni Gym on the campus of the University of Kentucky. Our Bruce Stoltz is one of the best players the school has ever had. John Edward Blackell, coach.
The Russell High School basketball team had high hopes in their first state tournament game ever. However, the Red Devils lost to Nebo in the first game of the tournament by a score of 31-6. Bruce Stoltz was the only Russell starter to even score, and he just got one basket. And two subs each got a basket. What a letdown. But we're still proud of our boys. Earl Mittendorf, the Russell Times.
The flood of the Ohio River Valley was the granddaddy of them all.
A heavy rain after Christmas in 1936 saturated Ohio soils, setting the stage for prolonged flooding in January 1937. 8 to 12 inches of rain swamped Ohio in a week and a half, beginning in mid-January, causing historic flooding that swept from central to southern Ohio.
All the way from Pittsburgh to Cairo, Illinois. At Portsmouth, it went 12.74 feet higher than the previous highest recorded level of the Ohio River.
From Gallipolis to Cincinnati, the Ohio River crested as high as 28 feet above flood stage.
Russell had a lot of damage, and hundreds of people were temporarily housed in cabooses, which were provided by the C&O. How bad was the flood here in Russell? This was the first time ever that the Russell Times failed to publish on schedule. But we are back now with a special issue showing much of the damage done by the flood. Earl D. Mittendorf, editor, the Russell Times.
Downtown Russell finally got cleaned up from the flood, and I just got a job as the projectionist at the Russell Theater. The first movie after the flood was titled Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, produced by a young cartoonist named Walt Disney. I really loved it. That Disney kid has a great future in Hollywood. Chester Rotroff, projectionist.
The post office that's been called Cheap Kentucky for 20 years is now called Flatwoods, and the town itself, which has been called Advance, was also renamed and is now officially Flatwoods, and the town has been incorporated. All I can say is, it's about time. Nancy Clark, postmistress.
For a small town, Flatwoods has enough young men to have a very good community band. My brother Roscoe and I originated the band, and we played frequently at events all around the community. And once in a while, we even get an invitation to play in Russell. Ed Clark.
Even though Flatwoods had a community band, that was its only cultural advantage over Russell. On the whole, Flatwoods lagged behind Russell in getting electricity and city water, a fire department, and paved streets. And many students who finished 9th grade at Advanced School simply dropped out of school, rather than having to get their own transportation to and from Russell High School every day. In the 1930s and into the 40s and 50s, only a handful of Flatwoods students actually graduated from Russell High School each year.
For the second straight year, Flatwoods will once again be playing in the Tri-State Baseball League, which has teams from the bigger towns: Fullerton, Portsmouth, Huntington, Louisa, and Ashland. I'm very proud that a town with such a small population is playing against them fellers, but to be fair, we do have players from Danilton, Muddy Branch, and of course, Indian Run. Squire Potter, manager.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The Russell Theater is showing a revival of the musical Anything Goes. I went yesterday and again today. I've been in every class play at Russell High School, and I really want to be an entertainer. Bill McCutcheon, class of 1944.
To all of our patrons, there was a wet-dry election in Russell, and they voted dry. The Dries won by a majority of 230 votes, 380 to 150. Unless I'm mistaken, this will be the end of the Coconut Inn at 333 Ferry Street. Addison Israel and wife Martha. P.S. Come by while you can.
A troop train passed through the Russell Depot yesterday, taking hundreds of soldiers from Fort Knox to a seaport in Virginia. They're on their way to the war in Europe. One of our local boys, Clyde Fannin, was on the train, and his parents, Virgil and Vashti, were there to wave at him as the train rolled through. They are so proud of him. Bessie Clark.
In 1943, there was a teacher shortage, and Ed and Bessie Clark's oldest daughter, Elzina, was hired to teach at the one-room Indian Run schoolhouse. Elzina had not gone to college, but back then, a Kentucky teacher was required to have just 4 years more education than the most advanced student. Every day she walked 3 miles, each way, along with her dog Ted, while her parents took care of their first grandson. The next year, with her husband at war in the South Pacific, she joined the defense effort by going to work for the Clayton and Lambert Munitions Factory located at Ashland Armco plant.
Bruce Stoltz, who is now a lieutenant in the Air Corps, came back home to Russell in a big way last Friday. He flew in a huge Army bomber over downtown, and hundreds of children and residents waved and cheered from below. He was on his way to Cincinnati and had informed his friends that he would be flying over his hometown. Happy landings, Lieutenant Stoltz. Earl D. Mittendorf, the Russell Times.
We have a flag in our window with 4 blue stars, 4 sons, 2 in the Army in Europe, and 2 on the same ship in the South Pacific, the USS Saratoga, an aircraft carrier. I pray that this horrible war will end soon. Bessie Clark.
They say that the war will be ending soon. One sign is the many trains stopping at Ashland, carrying German prisoners of war to Fort Knox. They're mostly young boys, not much older than my sons in high school. I hope this war is over before my boys are draft age. Stephen Lewis, C&O Station Master.
Sergeant Earl Clark, somewhere in Germany. Hello, Big Brother. Here's some local news that will interest you. As you know, Russell voted dry 2 years ago. Well, there was a Greenup county-wide local option election on May 21st, and the Dries won by over 800 votes. But a suit has been filed, stating that 3,000 men from the county are serving in the armed forces and had no opportunity to vote. How will this turn out? We shall see. I hope to have you back home soon. Your little brother, Chug.
This is VE Day, Victory in Europe. There was a huge celebration in Times Square, but part of the war is over, but the war with Japan is still going on. I won't sleep well until the boys in the Pacific are all home safe. Bernard Lockwood.
For the first time in almost 4 years, I don't have a feeling of dread in my heart. My 4 sons are all home safe. I can only imagine the grief of the Gold Star mothers. One of the worst days of my life was when I helped my neighbor change her 4 blue stars to 3 blue stars and 1 gold. May our nation never have to endure something like this again, ever. Bessie Clark.
In 1946, John Thomas, a 6-foot 10-inch basketball player, put Russell High School on the map. Russell was even invited to play a game in the UK Alumni Gym, and 3,000 fans showed up to see Thomas. The big city papers in Lexington and Louisville wrote features about John, and the Red Devils even reached the state tournament for the 2nd time in school history. And John Thomas was only a sophomore.
A new Russell YMCA just opened. It has over 100 rooms for where train crews can spend the night, a great basketball court for our young people, and even a bowling alley. And they have a restaurant that's open 24 hours and has some of the best biscuits and gravy that I have ever tasted. Coach Alex Silo.
How about this article from the Cincinnati Enquirer? The Flatwoods population is announced at 1,574, making it the fastest growing town in not just Greenup County, but the entire nation. Why, just 10 years ago, there was just 125 people living here. Ed Kiger, Mayor, Flatwoods, Kentucky.
For many youngsters with an interest in music, a weekly piano lesson at Mrs. Arrington's home in Russell was a part of growing up. The John Thompson piano book was a constant companion. And once a kid got the melody from Bill Grogan's Goat embedded in their mind, well, music would always be a part of our lives. Thank you, Mrs. Arrington. Donna Sue Sparks.
Mom, I'm now stationed at an Army base in Munich, Germany, just 7 years after my brother Earl was here fighting the Germans. Thanks for letting me know that Indian Run Road will soon have actual house numbers. That's hard to imagine. The mailman, Sylvester Albright, already knows where everyone lives. My best pal here is Pat from New York, and he didn't believe it when I wrote your address on the envelope. I plan on bringing him home with me on leave so he can see that Indian Run Road isn't even paved. Your son, Chug.
By the time Chug got home from the Army, Indian Run Road was paved, and city water had been installed in the Clark House. The outhouse that had been used since the home was built in 1924 was replaced by a flush commode, indoors.
In 1952, on the land where 80 years before John Kincaid's farm overlooked the Ohio River Valley, a new hospital was under construction. Our Lady of Bellefonte Hospital would serve Russell, Flatwoods, and the region for nearly 70 years. Linda Barry.
In the spring of 1953, Bill and Roger Haynes, who were 12 and 10 years old, talked their grandfather, George Savage, into putting up a backstop on a vacant lot behind the family garden. That was the beginning of what became known as Haynes Field. For that summer and many summers to come, Flatwoods boys could walk to Haynes Field or ride their bike and be pretty sure that there would be other boys there, bat, ball, and glove in hand, looking for a pickup game. In the mid-1950s, Clarence and Howard Bailey started building houses in Flatwoods. Their large work crews would literally build several houses on a street in a matter of weeks. Perhaps more than any other, they were responsible for the development of Flatwoods. Howard also built the first doctor's office and recruited the Jones brothers, who became Flatwoods' first physicians in 1960. On the evening of January 19th, 1957, well over a dozen members of Boy Scout Troop 168 in Flatwoods boarded a train in Russell bound for Washington, D.C. The next day, they would see the second inauguration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. For well over a decade, Scoutmaster Chester Slater was a leader and role model who changed the lives of many Flatwoods boys. As a footnote, most of the boys traveled free with a C&O family pass.
Since Russell High School first opened in 1915, students who lived in Flatwoods had to find a way to travel the several miles to school downtown. And then they had to find a way back home every afternoon. Now, 4 new school buses are in operation. I'm certain that will help the graduation rate of our students living in Flatwoods. Henry R. Evans, Superintendent.
Since the beginning of the federal highway system, the 2-lane US 23 had come through downtown Russell. But in 1958, the highway was going to be 4 lanes, and the bypass around Russell was completed. Few people realized it at the time, but it would significantly cut down on the number of people passing through the town, and the impact on business would be serious. One place definitely wasn't negatively impacted by change. The Apache, a new drive-in restaurant, opened in West Russell. This was the cruising age. And just as Ashland kids had the Bluegrass and the Outpost, Russell and Flatwoods teenagers had the Apache. And for the adventurous, they would make the loop from the Apache to the Outpost and the Bluegrass and back. And the new US 23 made it much easier.
In 1959, the senior class at Russell selected Kay Kaiser of Russell Heights as wittiest girl. 2 years later, she was in the entertainment industry, driving with the all-girl Auto Daredevils. And after that, she appeared in network TV commercials for Uniroyal tires. And by the way, the all-girl Auto Daredevils was just one of the attractions owned by Chester Rotroff, who got his start in show business running the projector at the Russell Theater in 1937.
In 1959, Russell annexed property in the Bear Run area, which was the beginning of expansion by the city. That same year, land extending to the west end of the city to the Worthington line was also annexed. On September 25, 1960, the Flatwoods City Council passed an ordinance calling for the question of the proposed merger between the cities of Flatwoods and Russell to be placed on the ballot for November 8th. The proposed city would have a population of 7,500, making it the second largest city in the eastern edge of the state. However, Russell voters rejected a merger with Flatwoods. The last basketball game was played at the Boyd Street Gym. Just a few months later, the new high school opened in Flatwoods. In August, and while the new school building in Flatwoods was still called Russell High School, the life and energy of a vibrant high school community was gone forever from downtown Russell. In 1969, Earl D. Mittendorf retired after 40 years as editor of the Russell Times. Nearly 100 years after the word railroad began to define Russell, it was gone. The C&O abandoned the depot and the freight station. And truly, the phrase, "the train doesn't stop here anymore," was a sad refrain that marked the end of an era. And while the decline of small towns in Middle America was not an unusual happening, Russell's was especially difficult. For the better part of a century, the railroad had been Russell's badge of honor. For many people who grew up in Russell and Flatwoods, they remember being able to go to the Russell train station, get on a C&O train, and go to Washington, D.C. or to Cincinnati, just like John Russell had envisioned. Now, the Russell train station was a relic of the past. Not only unused, but far worse, it was unneeded. Whatever happened to Bill McCutcheon? In 1988, Bill McCutcheon had a starring role in the Broadway revival of the same movie he had first seen at the Russell Theater, Anything Goes. And he was nominated for Broadway's top recognition, a Tony Award.
And the winner is... Bill McCutcheon to the fight! Anything goes!
Thank God for letting me live this long to be here.
The next year, he co-starred in the movie hit Steel Magnolias. In 1989, Bill sent a note to one of the people who greatly influenced him. Dear Numa Lee, I'm enclosing a poster from the movie Steel Magnolias. I want you to know how much your encouragement meant to me when I was a student at Russell. And your support still means so much to me. Always your friend, Bill McCutcheon. The decline of downtown Russell in the late 20th century was not a unique experience. All over America, small towns lost their economic engines, and as a direct result, lost their populations, and in many cases, lost their spirit. But for Russell, a new generation is now in charge, and they are looking at Russell as a place that is full of opportunity, combined with a small town lifestyle that is most attractive. Young entrepreneurs are seeing the benefits of owning a business that is just a short walk from home. Once again, you see people walking downtown in the evening, sitting on a park bench on the riverfront, and to quote a popular TV show's musical theme, where everybody knows your name. After years of a declining downtown, Russell is now enjoying a revitalization, and the town has a new energy that could not have been previously imagined. Downtown Russell has a new life and an exciting future. Today, a century after the original Ironton-Russell Bridge was built, the new bridge serves as a beacon, a symbol of the progress that is happening in the town of Russell. While Russell has the advantage of having a real downtown, Flatwoods has lots of land. Two major additions have greatly enhanced the city. The family of Joyce and Gerald Whitten has donated 72 acres of rolling land for recreational use. By comparison, Central Park in nearby Ashland is only 47 acres. And the Oaks Golf Club has been purchased by a French family, and the grounds are being turned into a vineyard, a winery, and a newly renovated golf course. Yes, Russell and Flatwoods are very different, and they have different reasons for people to say, life is great here.